go. I think perhaps it needs you to just say yes, you're okay with recording, or sometimes it does that.
Now, I have a question. So right now, Charlotte has it set to say SLSJ's meeting room. Do you want this to say my name? Does it matter? Are you going to introduce me?
Yeah, I'm going to introduce you as Dr. Toni Harrison-Kelly anyway, so it's perfectly fine for it to look however it needs to look.
About to click continue then.
Okay. Well, my name is Dr. Tim Gravoy, he, him, and I'm the Executive Director of TGS Consulting, and I'm just very excited to be talking about social and emotional learning with a friend and colleague, Dr. Toni Harrison-Kelly. She is a published author in Edutopia, has written a doctoral dissertation on gamification in the classroom, and shown how gamification supports particularly students of color. It's just been an absolute pleasure. We've had a chance to work together in many other kinds of respects. But Toni, if I may call you Toni, it's just a pleasure for us to connect about social and emotional learning and explore this topic, especially as it's been important here too. So did I get that right in terms of you and your work?
It was all right, and it's weird to hear back, but it's all right. Yes, praise the Lord. Lots of craziness has happened. Yes.
Oh my goodness! Because in addition to doing all of those things, you also teach. Where do you help kids learn and grow right now?
So I am a justice warrior by night, and during the day I am at Zumwalt Middle School in Dallas ISD. So I currently teach 8th grade. So when we talk about teacher struggles, I'm living those right now, like at 3:45 Central Standard Time. I just stopped and started my weekend. So these are real issues that I have to face every day. And so I'm excited to be able to share the things I've learned and things that I've read, and maybe be able to help some folks today.
And make it all classroom possible, which is the most important thing with all of this. Well, I had just a few questions that I thought would be really interesting to get your perspective on. So we'll kind of just use that as the framework for our conversation. But of course, if something really neat comes up, we might talk about that too. But we'll start with, just given that this is a conversation about social and emotional learning, what is it? Like what from your perspective is social and emotional learning? And is it something that you think about as you design the lessons for your classroom?
What I love about that question, Tim, is it makes me stop to really examine and break down and kind of codify what is it? And when I say I am implementing SEL, what does that mean? And so I think the simplest way that I can explain it is giving students the tools that they need to be able to belong and connect. So we know that belonging is a huge need. When you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you've got food, shelter, got safety, and then you have belonging. And so we all understand that it's really important. And I think that SEL is just us giving students the tools that they need to be able to make those connections.
So that's really interesting to think about, because we hear it all the time and seen it all the time. Students need to Maslow's before they bloom. And, just if your Maslow's being this framework for the needs that we all have. We have just food, shelter, safety, all of those kinds of things. We need love and belonging. And then comes mastery. I think that's the next one, right? In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the next one is where the kind of learning that happens at school happens. So it's if I'm hearing you right, you're thinking that those skills that we need for love and belonging are the skills that need to get learned and learned well before we're really in a place to work on the kind of learning that we typically associate with curriculum and standards and such.
Yes, and I also think that it has to be so intentional. The second part to your question was, how do I intentionally work that into my day? And I think that I do have to literally think, okay, does this activity help students connect together? Okay, do they even know each other's names yet at this point in the school year? How do I facilitate that? Now, the great thing about my current position is that I teach college and career readiness. So it's expected and mandated even that I teach these kind of soft skills that people would call them. However, it's all of our responsibility, even in the core classes. And I think that there's not really space for that. I think that we have a lot of data due, a lot of testing. And I think that that primary driver of testing and test results has made us prioritize. Teachers already have to do a million things every single day. And so if you're going to tell me that my data is the most important thing, then testing is going to be the most important thing in my classroom. So it's hard to balance anymore with all the test requirements.
Especially right now too, it's making me think that to a certain degree, social and emotional learning has kind of always been around. I'm thinking a bit of my great aunt Carlene. She was a teacher for many, many, many decades, and just at a stage in her life where she's not teaching any longer. But about 20 years ago, when she found out I was going to be a teacher, my great aunt Carlene says, "Tim, you can't teach unless you love your students." That was something that she was very clear about. That had to be, an absolute prerequisite, in my heart before I even walked into that classroom expecting to learn. So it's kind of always been around, and yet there's a new emphasis that started pre-pandemic, but is definitely there now. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, how do you see kind of that emergence of SEL, if there even is an emergence, if you're in that kind of light?
I definitely think there is an emergence. And I think that you're right. It's always been around. We call it soft skills, or we call it morals, or whatever we would phrase it as before we tagged it as SEL. But it's always been around. And I definitely think that during my first time teaching, my mentor teacher said, rules without relationship equals rebellion. So saying, I got a similar speech when I started teaching, that if you don't put the relationships first, if you don't love them, if you don't respect them, then you can't expect performance in any way, whether that's discipline related, or behaviorally, or if that's academically. However, I think that testing has crowded out SEL. I think that it's hard to choose, and I think teachers feel torn. I think we know what works best for kids. We know that they need love, they need connection. We know that. But if you're telling me that the data is the most important thing, if that's what the people who are my leaders are saying to me, then where do I squeeze in SEL? Where does that go? And so I think that this new emphasis that we're seeing is us trying to get back to the middle. So we had kind of, before we had teaching standards, I remember when we got our Texas standards, I was teaching fifth grade, and it was a big deal. We didn't really have, it was more of a loose kind of curriculum guide. It was not a 3.47 or 3.8 or this. There weren't these specific particular standards. Standards are good. I think that was a great addition. It helps us know whether or not we're meeting the mark, right? But then when we added in test after test each year, it's hard for us to balance, because if you're telling me I have to teach all of this information, yet you're not telling me how to integrate, then how am I supposed to meet in the middle? And I think the people who have suffered most are the children. I looked very briefly before this interview to see what the suicide rates are for teenagers, and they've gone up, 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 and up. And I don't have statistical data, but I just wonder what the connection is between the pressures of school, the lack of SEL, and these increased rates with students having issues with the handling all of that. And so I think that this is our swing back to the middle. I think that we're seeing that the kids are not okay. The teachers are not okay either, but the kids are not okay. And I think that we're trying to now retrofit these little SEL nugget lessons into this data-driven world. So, okay, today teach about fractions, but also talk about friendship. Oh, teach about fractions, but also work in a little bit about empathy. Where are they supposed to be?
Today's Resilience Day,
Hey, yeah,
for example.
yeah. This week, we're all talking about this habit of mind or whatever. Okay, that doesn't make any sense in the classroom unless you give really specific examples of how that's done. I mean, not every teacher can say, okay, I'm going to take empathy and I'm going to weave that into this lesson, and this is going to be this and that. So what you get is people taking these canned lessons, doing them at the beginning of the class in this complete silo where it's not applied, it's not practiced, it's not emphasized any other time. And then you expect kids to be better. And it just doesn't work that way. If you think about kindergarten, there's not one day that you stop and teach how to share. That it's not one lesson. We sit on the carpet. This is how you share. Okay, we're done with that. That's not how it works. It's integrated into everything that a kindergarten teacher has to do each day. And I think that sometimes we forget that teenagers need the same thing. And it's almost like we see college, the way professors teach, as the gold standard, when we all know that that's not what's best for any learner, adults, young children. sitting and listen to lecture for 45 minutes. That doesn't work. So I think that we're swinging back. I think we're attempting to now focus on SEL after we see how students are behaving in this completely test driven world. However, I think what's the missing component is integration.
Mhm. So it's interesting that you've talked about integration in that way, and also to use that early childhood example of that. So if you when you have a chance to visit those early childhood classrooms, nobody knows how to read, nobody understands the Pythagorean theorem, and it doesn't matter. The thing that matters most right now is learning what you said, learning those skills to belong. And it kind of connects with me. The state of Illinois, for example, has actual written standards grade by grade for social and emotional learning about, okay, these are the specific skills grade by grade that we want students to know. And it goes K-12, and it goes K-12. What I'm pretty sure is still happening though, is what you're saying, is that there's kind of someone's purchased the SEL box from somewhere and handed it out. And
we have one of those in the closet in our art room.
Yeah, and it's great to have it in the closet in the art room, because to a certain degree, I guess, well, or not, I'm just trying to be nice to the box, but as we think about it, but I just wrote about this pretty recently, but it's making me thinking about this again, that social and emotional learning. What is it? Do we know what it is that we're expecting students to learn? And then from there, how do we do that? I mean, ideally, we're talking about, okay, we're going to do fractions. I expect fractions to be hard. I expect fractions might feel a bit overwhelming to us the first time we go over it. When you feel overwhelmed, here's some strategies to deal with that. That would be beautiful. It's also a lot. It's a lot.
It is a lot
of someone leading learning. And I'm wondering how that plays out, because my sense of you is a person who loves your students a lot, and you want them to care about each other the same way that you care about them, or at least to demonstrate that respect to each other. How does that happen in the spaces where you're helping youth?
Listening,
like, what do you do?
Listening to you talk, what happens in the best of situations is that SEL becomes the framework from which you teach. It's not something that you're actually imparting to the students. You're teaching empathetically. You're presenting the content using self-awareness and all these other things. You're presenting and modeling along with the CASEL standards or whatever you use for SEL. So it can't just be informational. It can't just be, well, okay, learn how to do this, and without the teacher really genuinely believing that it's important and believing that it's important to model. So I don't know how any teacher can teach SEL if they really don't value student relationships. So I don't know how to teach that part. How do we help teachers value relationships, especially when everything around them is saying, yeah, relationships, but these scores, what about your scores? And so practically speaking, there are lots of little ways that I am able to implement SEL. As I mentioned before, I do not teach a core content. So that's rebellious of me in the first place. I'm like, yes, I have a doctorate, but no, I am not teaching math. I'm not teaching anything else, because I love this space to be able to guide them where they are in the 8th grade and kind of help them pick which way they want to go on the path. Like, I get to help them figure out which type of college and career. So it's a lot of fun. But practically speaking, I greet each student at the door every single day. And there are some studies out about how that lowers behavioral issues and all other kinds of supporting documents there, especially
another example of something that's not a new practice, right? Like that's
it's not new.
Emphasized and advocated for and talked about at least for as long as I've been in education, which has been about 20 years, and that feels like a long time at this point in my life.
Yeah, so, and add in some COVID years, boy, I tell you.
Oh, I know. I did some COVID years. It's basically like, we're all in this for about into the next millennium at this point. Oh my goodness. Yeah. But greeting students, that's something that you're disciplined about, it sounds like.
Every single day. And the kids wait for me at the door. You can't even enter without having an interaction with me. So hopefully that interaction is positive. I teach teenagers, so it's a roller coaster. You get one person one day, another person the next day, same kid, but it's okay. And so that's where I can see how they're doing. I learn, even with masks, I can see, okay, she's carrying herself different. Let me ask how life is going, what's going on. He's doing this or that. So just having collecting that qualitative data at the door when you are greeting students is huge, because then you can respond to them individually. I think that we all want to be seen and heard. And so the easiest way to guarantee that you see and hear every student at least once a day is to greet them at the door. I also fist bump them on the way out. So I know students, I mean, teachers, some of them are going to like elbows or whatever. But I greet them in, and then I escort them out to see how did class go? Are they, how are they processing things? Another thing that I do every single day is a connection bell ringer. So for the first like 5 minutes of class, we write every single day 2 sentences about whatever the bell ringer question is. The bell ringer question could be, what are you proud of? What are you grateful for? It can be anything. I allow myself to ask whatever question. On the best of days, when I'm being like teacher of the year level, my bell ringer ties in directly with what I'm teaching, but some days not. I allow it to be for those 5 minutes, whatever it is that I'm interested in knowing about my students. So they write. During the time that everybody's coming in, I read every single bell ringer. So I rotate to each kid and I stamp and comment, stamp and comment. So I have like a little set of smiley emoji stamps. They're all about getting the stamp. I know they're in 8th grade. They will do anything for a stamp or a sticker. So I stamp and comment every single day. They're walking in. It's a tiered situation. So like the first group comes in, gets their notebook, sit down, answer the bell ringer. I'm going and stamping and commenting, right? So by the time the last kid comes in from the hallway, so I've shaken hands. By the time everybody's in, I'm stamping and going as people finish. By that time, I can start class. So I stand up front and then I answer. So it's not just one way. I am also saying, this is what I hope. This is what I am proud of. These are the things that are important to me. My kids are like, yeah, we know Miss Kelly doesn't really like pets. I don't. And so I've already shared that and they freaked out. But, we share, it's a two-way relationship. And I think a lot of teachers want to keep this wall up of authority. They think that distance is authority, and it is not. Connection is where you have the most leverage. Is where they want to please you. You want to please them, and there's
Can I
give and
stop there for a
take.
second? Because you just said something that I think needs some space. That often we talk about like professional boundaries, and we need to set boundaries, and we do, right? I mean, we can't be taking our work home with us. We can't be, like a superhero to every youth all the time when we're not equipped to meet every last need. We have to, be aware of those boundaries for sure. But you're talking about something different than that. You're talking about this idea of like, oftentimes in teacher school, and even just we imagine, how we were taught that the idea of distance equals authority in a classroom, that we have authority because we keep our distance from our learners. And you're saying, well, not in my experience, and and really not what the research says, that, connection equals authority. That's where we earn that right to lead that group of learners. Am I saying it right?
Yes, yes. And I think that connection is where we have our most important bargaining chip as teachers. So that's, if they never want to please you, if you never, they know that you're disconnected from them, then it's hard for them to hear anything else that you have to say. And so I think that our old school folks believed that being distant and I'm here, you're here, but we're learning. I just read a little bit in Hammond, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. I think it's her book. She was talking about how you have to be a coach, and coaches are at practice, snapping the ball, doing things. They're not sitting in the stands yelling with a whistle and a megaphone. So I think that when students know you're in this with them, that's when they'll actually talk to you. That's when you'll start hearing the stories and making those connections and learning more about each student's culture and family. And I think that's where the foundation is laid. So you've covered those bottom rungs of Maslow's now. And now they're like, okay, you have the right to challenge me. You have the right to ask me to do hard things because I know you're here with me. I know a little bit about you. You know about me. We've shared some special moments. Okay, now I don't mind if you push me past my known boundaries to explore new learning.
So I had a colleague, Dr. Eve Rifkin, and I don't know if this is her quote or if it's a quote from another place that she gathered this quote. But Eve would say, when it comes to social emotional learning in particular, that it's really all about relationships and the skills that we need to build relationships, and teaching and modeling those skills to build relationships, and then everything else is just a box. Like everything else is just a box. And I'm wondering, just because there's a lot of boxes out there, some of them are really, really expensive boxes, in fact, and some of them are like somehow managed to show up for free. If you were a teacher who was really interested in social and emotional learning, and you wanted to do it, who sees that importance of connection and really sees distance as not really being helpful, and really views SEL in this way, what might you recommend to somebody who's been handed a box?
Mm. You know, I also realized when I was thinking through what we were going to talk about today, how much bravery it's going to take for a teacher to kind of draw the line in the sand and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to take these 5 minutes and connect with my students each day. So a lot of us are trained that we're supposed to teach bell to bell, and we're supposed to do this, and there's not supposed to be any downtime, in air quotation marks, etc.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a little bit of courage and bravery to say, okay, I am going to take 5 minutes a day to do these get to know you kinds of things. I think that I would start very small. If this is something that is interesting to you, I would start very small by greeting at the door. That's a low hanging fruit that once you get the swing of it, you'll want to be there to see your students every day, and they'll be waiting for you once you get them in the routine. I would also, in this testing world, I would throw on a test question that's SEL. I would throw in a getting to know you question for every quiz, every formative assessment that you have. I would just put a question. So if this 5 question quiz, 6 question, do you have a pet? Do you have whatever? And I also have written a very simple blog about it was finding your Amanda Gorman. It's on our website,
Yes, that one.
slsj.us. So it's slsj.us and click on blog. And it's all about it's like 18 different ways to just make simple connections and start learning more about your students. Because if we don't make these connections, then why would they learn? How would they learn? And so it's
So it's
really
not downtime.
important.
Like it's not downtime.
No, and that's the
It
fight.
isn't.
That's
Yeah.
where we have to fight is, if there are administrators who are saying something different, hopefully your administrator is fully supportive. You have the box, a lot of people have the box. So say that you're taking some liberties with what with the curriculum, but it needs to be customized and it needs to make sense for you. And the art of teaching is that there's not one way to do it. If you're not a touchy-feely kind of person, just make sure you do it on maybe there's an electronic way you do it. It doesn't have to be some hug every day and y'all sit in a circle. That's a great way. Connection circles, restorative practices, all those kinds of things. But I think on a scale of 1 to 10, that's a 10. That's like SEL max.
Assuming
But
you're doing it right. I've seen a lot of time wasted in circles, that's for sure. But I mean, even in SEL land, but you're right. Like, but I love what you're saying about that you've got this there's things that you can do right now that would be very, very powerful, and we've always known they're powerful and are really and are fun.
Yes,
and I
another
also
one of
love
my
how you
favorite.
acknowledge it. You acknowledge just that it might take some bravery depending on where you're at. That it might be that someone walks in and sees your bell question and wonders what that has to do with the French Indian War. That might happen.
And that's when you get that article from Edutopia or any other place and you stand on it. Okay, well, it says here that this is what it says about belonging. This is what I'm putting in practice in my class. I'll let you know how it turns out. And you just, it's advocating for ourselves as educators. We know what students need. Now we have to fight to implement that in the classroom. Additionally, I highly recommend if you teach teenagers or maybe above 6th grade or so, giving a student survey. Just ask them, how do you feel about our class? Do you feel safe here? Is there something I need to know? And it can be completely anonymous. And what I do is I give it to them on a Google form and don't require a name. And that way I don't really know who said what, but I know that I need to react and respond because they'll say, okay, this is what you do well. This is what you don't do well. No, I prefer this teacher because of this or whatever. It is hard to hear. It's hard to hear. especially when there are things that they want to correct you on. But
Mm,
if you listen to your students and let them know you listened, okay, I saw the survey results. We're going to discuss them very briefly today. These are the things that I'm going to implement going forward. That would take you a long way in building connections
mm,
with big students, with teenagers. So the student survey, greeting at the door, adding in questions. It doesn't have to be a bell ringer. It can be a test question, however you're going to put it in there. But how do you collect qualitative data about your students? How do you know them? And I think that prioritizing it in our minds is going to help the priority show up in our classroom. So remembering that it is a priority, you've got to create these spaces or else you won't have the success that you could if you were stopping to build these relationships.
so setting that attention, creating space for it, and making sure that
Mhm.
that the things that we do, that we take some kind of action on it. We let students know, if I had you do the survey, I want you to know that I know what's in the survey.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
there's what I also just love about the way you're approaching this, and suggesting that we as caring professionals in education approach this, is just do something small, and note how big a reward it pays off in terms of your students'
Mhm.
achievement. And
Mhm.
and it sounds like it's just fun for you too.
Oh yeah, I love it.
Without
It's
a doubt.
it's it's the way I was made. So this is so I understand that there are teachers who so when we talk about the warm demander pedagogical
Mhm.
approach with where you balance it the warmth with specific rigor and high levels of standard. I'm more warm than demander. So I have to make myself meet in the middle as far so I have to be more demanding. So this is very naturally comes to me, but even if it doesn't, there are ways that you can do it that fit your personality that don't make you, want to squirm and come out of your skin.
Yeah, we don't have to start hugging everybody. In fact, it wouldn't
No.
be advisable these days.
Yeah.
Honestly, it wouldn't even be the thing we want to do. But
No.
what can we do to increase connection, and what can and make sure that it feels right, that it
Hmm.
feels authentic to us? Yeah, it might push us a bit if that's
Hmm.
not where we're at right now, but it
Hmm.
shouldn't push us so far that we shut down. And that's, I think, really just great
Oh
advice.
yeah.
Dr.
Yeah.
Toni, I just really appreciate you giving me some time today and some space to talk about social and emotional learning. You offered some links to some really amazing blogs. I'll make sure that those go up, and also posted alongside the video, so that folks have access to that as well. And I just really appreciate you sharing your amazing perspective, and love and care for your students with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Tim. It's lots of fun.
Oh, you're very welcome. All right, we'll talk soon.